A new mom to a baby girl tragically drowned after she fell overboard during a 4th of July boating party. Her brother-in-law and his friend were both arrested and charged. So how did this happen? Who's at fault? Could the charges be upgraded? Well, we're going to break down the case with maritime attorney Michael Winkleman. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. What was supposed to be a fun celebration on the water over the holiday weekend, an activity that I imagine many of us do over the summer, turned into an absolute tragedy. And now the question becomes, who's at fault? On July 4th, 31-year-old Jerri MacMeekin was out on a pontoon boat in Lake Conroe, which is north of Houston, and she was with her husband, Brandon. Now, there's a bit of mixed reporting on who was actually driving this boat, whether it was Jerri's brother-in-law, Brandon's brother, Kyle Dean MacMeekin, or their friend Shane Everett Anaboli. What we do know is that Kyle and Shane were captaining two different boats. And also on one of the boats was Kyle's girlfriend, Aubrey Curlin. We'll get more to her in a second. Now, at around 9 in the evening, just as it was getting dark, the fireworks were about to start, the boats allegedly collided with another, and Jerri fell overboard. She wasn't wearing a life preserver. Kyle's girlfriend, again, Aubrey Curlin, immediately jumped in to help Jerri, but both women soon disappeared from sight. So Kyle and Shane, they dived in to help find them. Now, the Montgomery County Marine Division, Texas Parks and Wildlife, local fire departments, other first responders, they arrived within minutes of receiving a distress call. In fact, Captain Miguel Rosario was one of the officials who was there.
About 9 p.m., we responded to a lake rescue where a female had went overboard on a boat. Initially, our call note stated that one female had fallen over and 3 other people were in the water searching for her. Upon our arrival to the scene, we did find 2 boats that were traveling together. Subsequently, those 2 males were arrested for boating while intoxicated. We pulled everybody out of the water. Let's start.
Okay, go ahead.
Earlier this evening, about 9 p.m., we responded to a lake rescue where our notes indicated that a female had fallen overboard, and we had 3 other people in the water that were trying to locate her. Upon our arrival to the scene, we were able to find 2 of the males that had jumped overboard to save her, and at that point, we began looking for 2 females.
They ended up pulling Kyle and Shane out of the water, safe and sound, and then police used side-scan sonar to search the lake for Jerri. And as they were scanning, they find Aubrey Curlin alive and well.
One female that had gotten off to help find her, we did locate her about an hour later, safe on a dock.
So Aubrey had swum about 3/4 of a mile to get to safety, but unfortunately for Jerri MacMeekin, she wasn't as lucky.
And then about 2 hours later, unfortunately, we did recover the female that fell overboard. Involved in that search was Precinct 1, Texas Parks and Wildlife, ESD 1, and ESD 2 fire departments.
Yeah, after several long hours of searching, her body was finally located and retrieved at 11:30 p.m. by a team of rescue and recovery divers with the North Montgomery County Fire Department, and Jerri was pronounced dead at the scene. Talking accidents like this, tragedies like this, even potential litigation, I know I mention them a lot, but we're sponsored by Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. And look, if you should find yourself in that position where you're hurt and you need legal representation, Morgan & Morgan may be who you want in your corner because they're specialists in this area. And they're so big because they win a lot. Verdicts and settlements in the multi-millions. They also make the process super easy for their clients because from starting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts to talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. Also, this is a firm where there's no upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar. It was a tragic end to Jerri and Brandon's love story. They married in 2021 after spending many years dating. And just, by the way, 7 months ago, they'd welcomed a baby daughter, Georgia Grace. So incredibly, incredibly sad. Now, the Montgomery County District Attorney, Brett Ligon, said that these are the perils of being on a boat drinking all day, the perils of being on a crowded lake. These are the things we hope to avoid every summer. And for the people involved in Jerri's drowning, it doesn't end with Jerri's death.
Subsequently, those 2 males were arrested for boating while intoxicated.
Game wardens with the Texas Parks and Wildlife arrested Shane Annaboli and Kyle MacMeekin. They were held at the Montgomery County Jail until MacMeekin was released on a $3,000 bond. Annaboli was freed on a $1,000 bond, and the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office would not say if the men would face additional charges due to Jerri MacMeekin's death, but prosecutors said that the investigation is ongoing. So with that being said, I want to bring in maritime attorney Michael Winkleman to get his thoughts on this accident. Michael, really sad case, but it's an interesting one for a number of reasons. And I actually want to start out by asking, we obviously have talked a lot about drunk driving incidents, but are the laws different when you're talking about operating a boat as opposed to a car?
Not really, no, Jesse. I mean, you have the same principles in play. You can't drive while intoxicated. You can't boat while intoxicated. So instead of it being a DUI, it's a BUI. And unfortunately, doing what I do for a living as a maritime attorney, the vast majority of boating accidents occur with some level of alcohol involvement. It certainly sounds like that was the case here. This is the reason I never go on the water on any kind of a major holiday, particularly July 4th. Because there's just, when you mix in boating with alcohol, it's just, this is sadly what happens. I mean, it really sounds like this was a tragic accident, but there's no doubt in my mind that it was 100% preventable.
Let's get into that. By the way, before we even get into it, your profession, you must see this a ton, because according to data, my understanding is from the Texas Parks and Wildlife, 172 people were arrested for boating while drunk in 2023, 56 of them over the July 4th holiday weekend. So you see this happening a lot, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I would have actually guessed the number was far higher than that. And I'm from Miami, Florida, born and raised, and that's where my practice, our headquarters are. But we have thousands of boating under the influence charges that are levied on every major holiday, which is the primary reason why I just won't set foot at sea on those kind of days. It's just too much risk.
Yeah. And now we have a life lost, and we're trying to understand why this happened. And you mentioned whether it was preventable. So now we have two men who are arrested for boating while intoxicated. Talk to me about what the legal ramifications are of that, because my understanding it's a misdemeanor, right?
Certainly that would vary by state. It is my understanding it's a misdemeanor. It could very easily become a felony, though, if there's certain aggravating circumstances. I don't see any of them in play at this point, but this is clearly an accident. You had really either two families or friends on different vessels, a preventable accident. It doesn't look like there was any level of really criminality to it. I do think there will be likely some charges related to the drinking and boating. I would be surprised if it goes any further than that, because this is a family that's really already suffered enough in just a few days since the incident occurred.
I can completely understand that. The tragedy of it, what the family's lost, completely understand. But having said that, that hasn't prevented prosecutions in the past if it's criminally negligent homicide or if it's manslaughter. Why do you say there's no aggravating factors here?
Well, again, I don't know of any yet, Jesse. This is so early. If we were doing this a month from now and we'd had more circumstances, I think there might be something else in play.
I guess my question is, what would you be looking for that could be an aggravating factor?
How much alcohol was consumed, how long they were out there. Were they out there since 11 a.m. and the person drinking blew a 0.3 to the point where he shouldn't even been walking? I mean, these would be the type of circumstances that I think would be aggravating. Whether or not they were using any kind of basic safety, obviously there were no life jackets since Jerri wasn't wearing one, but things of that nature. But I don't see any of that at this point, Jesse.
Okay, so since this is very similar to car accidents, if both of them are drunk, but they, through the analysis, you can determine one rammed into the other, why were they both arrested? Why were they both charged the way that they were charged?
Well, again, I can only speculate because obviously I wasn't the prosecuting authority or anyone related to it, but it would have to have been that they were both visibly intoxicated and or were honest and frank about the fact that they had been consuming alcohol. And that in and of itself was enough to have taken them into custody overnight. The fact that there was a fatality involved from the moment that the police came on scene, I think that gives it an extra reasons for the police having taken them into custody. So that would be my likely thoughts as to why there was a difference between both of them being charged and at different levels in terms of the bond.
So again, I believe this is a Class B misdemeanor, up to 6 months in prison. The fact that they have different bonds, right? So does that signify to you at this stage one was potentially more culpable than the other? And again, when we're talking about culpability, do you think that there could be any legal action, a civil action, a lawsuit filed as a result of this?
Well, so the first part of it is why there was different bond amounts.
Yeah.
My primary guess would be that they determined one vessel was more at fault than the other. So the person who was charged or had the $3,000 bond they thought was likely at fault, therefore had a higher bond amount. The only other reason I would see a disparity between the two was with one, for some reason, was just visibly way more intoxicated than the other one. That would be my primary reasoning as for the difference. And in terms of legal liability, remember, for me, I'm not a criminal attorney. I'm a civil attorney. I'm a maritime civil attorney. So the question is whether there'll be any negligence lawsuits between all the parties that are in play, really the estate of Jerri. And at this point, I think it's probably too early to tell. Generally speaking, when you have family like this, I don't know that they would be looking to bring litigation against each other. But I don't know, were these vessels that were owned by these two parties, or were these vessels that were rented by these two parties? If they were rented, then you could have potential litigation against the rentor of the boat in terms of whether or not they gave them proper training, things of that nature, whether or not there was proper safety equipment in play. But generally speaking, if you didn't have two families in play, I would think there would be litigation. But because you have such a close tie between the two of them, I think it lessens the likelihood of there being civil litigation related to the incident.
So again, we don't know at this point if anything like that will happen, but if I'm thinking about Brandon and I'm thinking about now he has lost his wife, the mother of his child, does it matter of whether or not he was intoxicated? Does it matter or not whether he knew the people on the boat were intoxicated? Because I imagine that could be a defense, right? You know, you made a conscious decision to go on that boat knowing the risks, right? Is that something that would have to be part of the analysis?
Well, I think you could have what would be called an argument of comparative negligence against Jerri or her husband, that they knowingly choose to go on a vessel at night where there's drinking involved, didn't take the extra step of wearing a life jacket. In my experience, a lot of people don't wear life jackets, especially when they're on pontoon boats, which don't go particularly fast. I know if I'm on a vessel at night, particularly when traveling at any kind of speed, I'm wearing a life jacket. My family are wearing life jackets. So there certainly would be arguments of comparative negligence. Of course, they're all speculative at this point. But in terms of the fact, does it really matter legally that there was friends or relatives? Not really. If someone's at fault and you file a lawsuit against them and you prove that they were at fault, then theoretically someone could be on the hook for all of the damages related to Jerri losing her life and baby Georgia not having a mother for the rest of her life.
And by the way, going back to the criminal aspect, I mentioned it's a misdemeanor. You know, if there was any incidents in the past where either of them had been drinking while driving or drinking while operating a boat, that would obviously work against their favor, could upgrade it to a felony as well, I believe so. But I imagine from a legal point of view, that could hurt them as well if they have anything in the past. I guess the question is, when we're talking about the prevalence of this and how often this happens and how often happens, like you said, on holidays, has there been any discussion about changing the law for more stricter penalties for this kind of behavior?
There's been heavy conversations about that in Florida for years, if not decades. And every time someone passes away at sea from a preventable incident, absolutely, they look to increase charges, change charges, increase changing. There's been similar efforts like that in the past in Texas. It's funny, though, with Texas and Florida, you have two very I don't want to say conservative states, but ones where maybe there's less regulations that you would in a place like California. California generally has more strict boating laws in terms of being able to actually pilot a vessel. So you would hope that when tragedy strikes like this, the only perhaps silver lining can be that it raises awareness about it, leads to greater regulation, greater training, which just hopefully prevents it from happening again in the future.
And by the way, I was talking a little bit about the efforts that first responders were using to try to recover these, try to rescue the people that had fallen in the water. Talking about using scan sonar and things like that. I imagine trying to rescue people in that kind of environment is particularly difficult, right? I mean, what do we know about using this kind of technology and how difficult it is to ultimately try to rescue people?
I actually think the search and rescue efforts, and I applaud the first responders who were able to locate the body and obviously rescue the people that were in the water. Comparatively, this would have been a relatively easy operation because you're in a limited area. And I compare that to, unfortunately, I'm an expert in people going off of cruise ships and being in the Caribbean, where you have this vast multi-mile area where the Coast Guard, with the most top-notch search and rescue people in the world that are in play, how hard that is. That's literally finding a needle in a haystack. Here, I think it's very different than that. But yes, the technology is fantastic. I think the first responders are fantastic. But comparatively, compared to what it could have been in so many of the stories that we hear about cruise ship overboards, I think this was a far simpler task.
Just a really sad case, tragic case. And as the more we hear about it, we hear how this could have been prevented. And we think about the loss of her life. We think about the loss of Jerri's life. We think about the fact that this her daughter will grow up without her. Her husband will live a life without her, and it's senseless. It again, shouldn't have happened. But Michael, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much for giving your expertise on it, and hopefully we don't see another case like this anytime soon.
For sure. Thank you, Jesse. Nice to see you.
Good seeing you. All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.